All right, so I am live. Hopefully, everything is working. So, my big plan is to see the sunrise this morning. I want to do something maybe a little different. So, I think when I first left off here, it's raining. Probably can't see that very well. I was talking about how thoughts need to have some action behind them. And I've been taking some actions, although they're very minimal. And I know I need to do more because I need to leave this place soon. I'm going to be evicted, and I'm ashamed to say that because I don't know. I've been really trying to put my life back together. But when you're targeted, I don't, and you're not strong enough and stable enough, you tend to. I mean, well, for me, I would say I tend to act erratically or impulsively. So it's a lot of light pollution in this little vicinity here. But so I had a plan in place because I knew it was not sustainable. I knew I was going to have to leave here because it wasn't working. But the thing about targeting, they say, and they meaning the research I've done online and the various groups of people who say that they know about targeting, that no matter where you go, it happens again, the same stuff eventually. So then one of the things that kept me here was I was listening to this one guy. I wasn't reading, but I was listening to a YouTube channel, and he was really saying, stop moving from place to place because all that is doing is just diminishing your funds. And every time you have to pick up and move, it costs more money. And so I was like, yeah, if it's just going to happen somewhere else, like why go somewhere else? But the thing is that I don't know. For me, just psychologically, it seems like it would work better to just go somewhere else and start again. And at least for you, it doesn't matter what other people are doing. Do you know what I mean? Like if they're going to start it all over again, that's fine. But at least for the person, it feels like a fresh start and doesn't necessarily. So, I mean, that's the thing for me. And, I don't know. What's wrong with moving? You stay somewhere for a few years, you move to a different place. Lots of people do it, even if it wasn't targeting. And you never know. People are different everywhere. I'm sure they can get people to target you if they tell them, negative things about you that would make people in the community want to target you. But not everywhere is the same. And maybe I'll have to leave the country. Who knows? So maybe that's an action I need to take. I don't know. Also, in the last video I did, I talked about being an interracial couple, and it actually sparked some debate. Not so much on my channel, which I would appreciate. Bring it to my channel. Just put it down there to share your thoughts about interracial relationships. I definitely, there's a woman, I'm assuming this person is a woman, on Twitter who is, I believe, also a targeted individual. And I also believe maybe she's Southeast Asian. She doesn't have a picture of herself, but her correspondence sounds like a little, like, she's, English is maybe not her first language. And also, I think she mentioned she was from Southeast Asia. But, she felt that interracial couples were fine. And And although her experience is different, and she's from Canada, I believe, but I have another person who is on my Twitter, and he is very opposed to interracial couples, and he's um, a black African American or black person. I don't know how he really identifies, but and they had this whole thing going back and forth, and I was like, should I say something? But I didn't really feel like I needed to say anything about that. It was interesting to read the two different perspectives, and I'm probably somewhere in the middle. So I'm not policing who other people fall in love with, but I just don't think it's as simple, especially with Black people. I don't know enough about the Asian experience to say what I think, and nor can I speak for all Black people. You know, we're not um, a monolith, and I don't represent everyone. I mean, I think that's one of the issues with African American people on some level, is that we don't get to just be everything, you know, meaning there's a whole wide array of us. Some of us are just really, like myself, more eclectic and kooky and kind of out there. And then there's definitely people that might fit someone's stereotype. And then there's the hyper intellectual activists, or slash just hyper intellectuals, even scientists types. I mean, there's all types of African American people, but we get so bogged down, and there's only this one way to be. And but I think the one thing that really ties us together, African Americans, are the shared history in the United States and the shared ancestry, meaning those that come from, are descendants from the people who were enslaved here, and that history. And that's something very specific, and something, you know, some people like a Candace Owens, um, who doesn't care about that, and it doesn't matter to her, and she doesn't see that as a tie that binds, although I believe she did when it was convenient for her, because I think that she actually used the NAACP to fight a discrimination case that she had while she was in college. I don't know enough about it, but I know that that is actually factual. So I think when it benefited her, she identified as an African American person who understood that there was racism and discrimination that would affect her education and livelihood. So, but as a person who's had interracial relationships, I haven't had a lot of relationships. You know, I'm sure in my dossier that the people who are torturing me, they feel like I've just like been standing on the street corners or something. I don't know. But in real life, I've only had two really major relationships, and long-term relationships, one for 7 years, one for 14 years. And they were both with people outside of my race. And it's just not as easy as you think. I think that relationships in general are just difficult, like without adding a racial or cultural difference to it. But especially with Black people and white people in the United States, it might be different. Like when it was with my son's father, whose family I said was from Nicaragua, and he was the first generation a Nicaraguan American born here. He It was different. It was different than being in there was more shared experience of living in urban areas, growing up, going to urban schools. Though there was a different language, and as I said in my last video, they definitely had some racial issues, some colorism issues. There is more of, I think, somewhat of a kinship, that we do share a struggle, because we all grew up in the same neighborhood. We went to the same school. The parents, probably had a high school education at most on both sides. So there was that kind of shared experience. And also, Latinos are also I would say, an oppressed group. We see what's going on at the borders here. They want to start a civil war to keep people out. So, but with Black and white people, especially coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds and educational backgrounds, there can be some differences. And also, if the people, depending on what you want, how your relationships play out, because at some point it started to feel like I was seen as someone that was not as good as my ex-husband. I was not on his level. And I also think he just thought he was better than me. And he did things to me and said things that were racial to me, or racially motivated, when other people weren't around. And when other people were around, he was his regular charming self. And he never put his hands on me or anything, but I definitely physically, not physically abusive, but psychologically abusive and mean. But, one could argue that could happen within the same racial couple. So, but I think it hits differently when there's that outside power dynamic. And as I said, when I would say things, and that was one of the most, I think that was one of the most annoying things and Black people, many, not all, will tell you, even when they're at work and then they're just surrounded by white people, and they're sharing their ideas and trying to get their points across, they're not really taken seriously, or no one's really listening like they should. Like, they're not seeing you as an equal or taking your ideas as seriously as they would take someone else's. That was something I experienced when I was at Berkeley, and it was so annoying. And things I would say, and it's funny because they came to pass later. But when I was at Berkeley, I remember saying clearly that, because everybody was super liberal there, and they would say things to me, and I say, well, I kind of disagree with that. And they would say, well, maybe you don't understand because you're oppressed. And maybe you've identified with your oppressor, or I don't know. They just didn't take my ideas. And I said, I think white liberals are worse than even the right wing so-called racists. And don't get me wrong here. I don't think either side is great, but when liberals go to their extreme, they're just as dangerous. And it's even worse because you trust them. And they just have this cloak of liberalism that they can't be touched, or their ideas can't be countered. And if you say something, then there must be something wrong with you, or you're just not understanding. So that was a difficult time for me. But to take it back to the relationship, it's can you imagine just living that? Like, it's not just at work and you go home and then you're fine and you're with your family and you cook your dinner, but then it's kind of an all ongoing thing where you never feel quite like an equal partner. And it's hard enough as it is, because in a relationship, depending on what kind of relationship you've decided to have, if some people want more of a traditional relationship, and the man is definitely the head of the family and is the leader, and the woman is more subservient, or I don't know, subservient, what is that? There's a term for it, and it's not in my head right now. I know someone who might eventually watch this will say, yeah, I know the term, and it's this, but it's not popping into my mind right now. So I think our relationship definitely wasn't traditional. I would have liked for it to be a little bit more traditional, meaning that I felt that the man was definitely the leader and the financial provider, and did things like took the garbage out, and I wouldn't have to do it. And I remember saying to my mother-in-law, like, so who took the garbage out when you were, who takes the garbage out? You or Jim? That's her husband's name. I said, well, whoever's available to take it out. And it's like, okay, I mean, I get it, but I mean, some things I would appreciate if they were, I mean, I cooked the majority of the time and I didn't mind because that was just what I would want to do. Unless it was a barbecue or something. But anyway, just to get back to that. So I just don't think that it's as easy as we would like to think it is. And there's outside factors. And no one wants to be in a relationship that they feel like they're a second class citizen to their spouse. And no one wants to be in a relationship where they feel that their spouse is inherently better or superior or anyone in their spouse's family. And I think that's what I went through. And I'm not saying I brought some of that internalized racism with me. And so it wasn't always on them. Some of it was my own insecurity. These are insecurities that I probably wouldn't have had to worry about in a different relationship. So, and also on his side, because he grew up in Oakland and he, I think, was terrorized by some of the people in his neighborhood and probably developed this, he developed strategies of how to survive in those circumstances when he's surrounded by people of color that might not have been so friendly with him. And I also think sometimes that he got back. He had some internalized hatred for people of color, although he had Black friends and only exclusively had relationships with women of color, either Black or Asian. But that still doesn't mean anything, and we know that, right? It doesn't matter if you sleep with someone. We know that Thomas Jefferson had a 14-year-old young girl that he had enslaved and had a lot of children by her. So, and did not think that those children were still slaves, were still enslaved. So, and he still thought that Black people were inferior to him. So we know it doesn't matter who you're sleeping with. And there's probably more current. I mean, I think Kid Rock's first child is half Black, and he's a pretty racist individual. So it's just more to it. Or, you could look at Halle Berry and both of the fathers of her children are white. And I think they both have used the N-word and were very racist. And that's the kind of thing, you don't necessarily want your kids to grow up with. And I mean, not even necessarily. Well, I'm saying necessarily you don't want your kids to grow up with. There's enough where the world is cold and harsh place. And I think it's turning into more of a cold and harsh place. I mean, if you want to compare it to medieval times or, okay, yeah, it was more brutal during that period and people didn't live as long. Back in the 17 and 1800s. I get that. I understand that. Things are better in some ways, but in other ways, it's still difficult. Life is still difficult. So, like, adding extra layers with cultural differences and race. And again, I think particularly with Black people, it's like, I don't know. But I mean, I think if people are extremely secure in their own backgrounds and they are very clear on how they're going to raise their children and make sure that their kids see all the beauty in both cultures and understand the history of the oppression from, if it's a white person that they're with, that there's been this history of oppression. I mean, not to make them feel bad, but to understand that there's going to be some interplay here. And you have to figure out the right time to tell them these things or talk to them about these things and to make sure that they don't hate either side. I mean, I don't want to go around hating people. I mean, that's not something, for their race. Although I've been, not gonna lie, I've been kind of angry about it because when my targeting first, I don't know. I mentioned this last time about my targeting. I mean, so many things happened to me, and so many things that I did a lot of online dating and online chatting to people and things, and I really do believe that may have been how this started. Um, there's also there was a guy that I met from a friend, and he wasn't a bad person or anything, but it definitely some things are going on with him and his family and just him. And I don't think his family liked me very much, and or his friends, and it's kind of a, I don't know, somewhat of a sketchy relationship. And you just don't know. You don't know how these things happen. But there was one guy that I met, and I remember he told me he was a military person. And I met him on Craigslist. Thank God they don't let people hook up on Craigslist anymore. And I kind of think that maybe he had something to do with it, my targeting, because it's like I said, this is a military operation, you know. And I'm convinced of it because where I live, there's a lot of people who are in the Navy. Like there's at least 5 people. Um, and Aaron Alexi, who's the Navy Yard shooter, he went and shot those people in the Navy up. So it's so interesting because I moved from California, and I always say I jumped from the frying pan into the fire because it's worse here. Targeting is worse, and I think there's just a lot more. There's just more connections to the private contractors in Seattle, and then the military and the whole tech, Amazon and Microsoft, because the technology that they use. So, as I said, the thoughts have to lead into some sort of actions, right? So, oh, my foot is falling asleep. So I've done some actions, but not enough. I need to make a lot of phone calls. I got to figure out like where I'm going because I got to get out of here soon. Not, I mean, it's pretty imperative. I'm not acting like it is. I mean, so I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed that there's something that's going to come out of some of the things that I've worked on. However, there is a part of me that just feels like, what's the point? I mean, I have about a good 20 years. And out of those 20 years, I probably have maybe 15 years, 15 good years, meaning I'm going to be relatively healthy, I hope. I don't know. And can walk around and take care of myself and whatnot and work. And then at some point, I'm just going to be old and decrepit. And if the rest of my life is going to be this rinse and repeat of I move somewhere, I get a job, I work somewhere, and then I'm targeted and people sabotage my work, and then people like mob me when I go outside and harass me and say weird things to me, and then if I go to work, they tamper with my food or they damage my clothes, or if I have a car, the reason why I didn't get a car, I almost got a car and I should have, because at least if I got kicked out, I could sleep in it. Now what am I going to do? But anyway, it'll all work out the way it's supposed to. But I mean, who wants to live that life? I mean, who wants to live a life where you're constantly being followed and you're constantly being sabotaged? And there's no way, it's some really intricate, some intricate takedown, slow kill program, they call it. Who wants to live that life? I mean, I don't. I really don't want to live a life where I would go and I move somewhere else, and then they decide that they're going to just start the whole thing over again. Or whatever it is. I don't really, that's the thing about targeting. You just don't understand. I don't really know how it's done. Because one of the things I know that's hard for other people to believe, and it's also hard for me to believe, is that why would people, it's like really at this point, it's thousands of people that are involved in my targeting, like thousands. For one, how it's illegal. Like, I don't care what they say. I don't care what the police have told people, or the fusion centers and the Department of Homeland Security and whoever else is involved have told people that it's okay to do this because I'm under some kind of surveillance. I don't think surveillance is because I'm a terrorist or some kind of trafficker or whatever. I don't really know what they think, but I've been aware of it since 2016. So that's about 8 years or so. And then they say that, you're investigated before that. So let's say another possibility is Dr. John Hall, who's written a couple of books about targeting. And he mentioned that his ex-girlfriend had just moved into an apartment and just started. And I read a book by someone else and they say, yeah, I just moved into this apartment and then it started. And so it could have just started because, for one, I was a single lady all alone. And if you need to put people on a list or something and they don't really have relatives around, or they have some other characteristics that are beneficial, like, I don't know, they've been depressed or had mental illness in their family or substance issues, like I like to drink and stuff, they might they put vulnerable people in these programs so they can systematically tear down their lives, or at least guide them into destruction. But getting back to the point, if it's thousands of people that are participating, wouldn't someone be like, wait a minute, I don't want to participate in this? Even if they think, well, no, this is a terrible person. There is something called due process. And after about 10 years of someone being under surveillance and you haven't gathered enough evidence to prosecute them, then what is the point of their surveillance? And that's the weird thing about targeting, because at some point it's not really about, I said this before, it's an agitation program to agitate you into doing something. And then, you can get into all the conspiracy theories of the Great Reset. I'm just a pawn in some game because it's not really about something I did. Because if that was the case, I would be, if they would either stop surveilling me because they don't have any evidence to prosecute me, or they would just put me in jail. So, I mean, the 10 years of torture, and there's other aspects of it. There's the whole direct energy weapons, which are attached to the whole Havana syndrome. And I don't feel that as much, but I probably do get it, but I don't feel it as much. But I was feeling it a lot more when I would go to work. I would do things because the idea is to keep you isolated and to keep you contained. to make you not do anything. You essentially just ruin your own life by inaction, not doing anything. Because when you do things, then you're followed and you're harassed or you're sabotaged. Or you're hit with some kind of microwave weapons that make you feel sick. There's pressure in your head. Which is related to Havana syndrome. You guys could, if anyone's listening and they are not a targeted individual, or if you are and you don't know much about it, then you should probably do some research about the whole Havana syndrome. And I remember in the very beginning, I felt more of those weapons. And that was really before the guy that I met on the internet, that stuff was happening. That happened in about 2014, and I was having these heart problems. I was having chest. They weren't really chest pains, but they were like chest heart flutters or something, and it was really weird. And I kept going to the doctor, and I'm like, no, we don't see anything. And there's absolutely nothing. And my blood pressure has been high since about, I don't know, probably for about 12 to 15 years, and I was taking medication for it. So, and the sun is coming up. I mean, well, it's, you see, it's not, we don't see the actual sun there, but it's getting lighter. So I was feeling a lot of the symptoms of Havana syndrome earlier on, I think, and I just didn't know what was happening to me, but I didn't, but now it's mostly gang stalking. And I live in a place like this whole Seattle area in Belleville. I'm sorry. I think these people were happy they get to follow my butt around. They're like, we can't wait. I swear on Twitter, these people are like atrocious. It's like the news, anytime there's a crime, if it's a Black people, they can't wait. The people can't wait to get on there and say how Black people are just so horrible. And someone said they're worthless Black teenagers. And I said, I just said, why would you write that? That's such a horrible thing to say. And he's like, well, it's a well-known fact that these Black teenagers with no fathers in their homes commit the majority of the crimes. And there's just something we have to do about it if we ignore it. And it's like, dude, you don't care about. Then he tried to get on this whole, if we ignore it and do nothing about it, it's like, what are you talking about? If you said they were worthless, so why would you even want to do something about worthless? If something's worthless, you don't care about it. And that's just what these people in this neighborhood feel about me. And I'll say that, and then when I go to the store today or tomorrow, there'll be some Black people out there stalking me, and no one cares about that. We know that you get Black people to do your dirty work. Or you get them to turn on their own kind. And again, maybe it's because they think I'm a horrible person, and they think, no, it doesn't matter, race doesn't matter. And I get that. Like, if you think that I'm a threat to society, then race isn't going to matter. But the real ironic thing, and this is ironic, is that these people who are stalking and harassing me are actually the threats to society. I'm sorry. They just are. Because, we do have a system of how things are supposed to go. And agitating people and sabotaging people behind the scenes and systematically. I mean, what chance did I have? What chance did I have here trying to go to work and do my job? I could see if I was at my job and I was doing stuff and I was doing something illegal and I was, selling drugs, or I was trying to enlist kids in some kind of illegal activity or something at my work. I mean, there was nothing like that. And I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was selling drugs outside of my apartment, or I had a brothel in here or whatever. Okay, I understand that. I understand why you would be following me. And but even then, I mean, but why are you doing it? And when I've lived here since 2019 in this one particular place that you guys are looking at, and none of that has happened. There's no indication of that. I'm not even before that, even at my old apartment, none of that was happening. So what? And the thing is that most of the people, it's just compartmentalized. I mean, I know that. So the people who, when I go to the store and they just happen to pop up at the store, they are just told something that they're supposed to do and they just do it. And they may, and the reason that they're doing it is because they've been told I'm some sort of threat and they want to protect their families from me. And being black doesn't help because I'm sure that just makes it like the guy on the internet was like, it's those black kids and grow up with no fathers in the home. Like these people have all these stories. That's what I always think about that too, that these people who are participants just tell themselves these stories about me. And especially, I'm like, for the past year and a half, I've been incredibly depressed. And probably since 2000, since I moved here, and even before that, I've been traumatized. I mean, you can't be a targeted individual and not be traumatized because all these things are happening to you and no one really believes you. I mean, the people who have people in their lives that believe them about their targeting, they're so fortunate because I think there's something to just like really uncomfortable because I'm just sitting on the floor, and the floor is like hard. So anyway, this is the first day of the rest of my life kind of deal. I have many things to do. I haven't seen the sunrise. I don't go outside anymore. It really sucks. I used to go outside every day, even when I didn't feel like it. And obviously I was working, so I would go outside. But then, in the summers or whatever, I would still go outside. So yeah, just getting back to, I'm just waiting on some things to happen. I'm going to try, I'm not going to try, there's only do, right, Yoda? So I'm going to go and I'm going to do some things that I need to do in order to make some moves. And hopefully, I think the goal of most of the people who participate in this program just want me to leave. So if that's the goal, then I hope that they will just facilitate that so I can get out of here and they can, have their apartment, and then they can move someone in here that they feel safe around and not threatened by, and don't think is a terrorist or whatever they think. And I could just skedaddle. And if that doesn't work, then I am not opposed to, oops, pardon me, I'm not opposed to just ending it all. I have these fantasies, if you can see right over there's the police station, just ending my life here. Not fantasies, but, and then I can just stay here and I can haunt these people. I could be the Merc apartment poltergeist. I mean, that doesn't seem like too bad of a gig. I can torment my tormentors forever. All right. So what do you think? What are your ideas? What are you thinking? So I talked about a lot of things. I talked about, well, of course, my targeting. What do you think about that? Do you think I'm delusional? Do you think I'm paranoid? I mean, I can take it. Do you think that target people are just not taking accountability for their lives? And I mean, that's something I hear. Do you think what should my next steps be? I mean, it's hard for me. I don't want to say things that I'm doing, although I know they know what I'm doing, but because somehow I'm under some weird surveillance. But and plus, I'm talking about it on a public platform. But I mean, I try not to be very specific in every detail of things I want to do, or I'm planning to do, just because it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. Can't tell people everything. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's bad enough that I'm yammering on right now. I'm just doing it because, for one, I have this YouTube channel, and at some point, before I leave, there's one thing I wanted to share. So when I was at Cal, we had this assignment, and we were supposed to go and interview people and talk about cultural capital, or societal, social capital, cultural capital. How does it manifest itself in our wherever we went? So I decided to go to the farmers market, and instead of just interviewing and writing down what people said, I did this whole. I actually filmed them, and I did this little short film of these people talking about how social capital plays out in a place, in the setting such as the farmer's market. And I had so much fun doing that. Like, I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. And this was before YouTube. This is like way before that. I mean, I don't know when YouTube started actually, but it was before I was on YouTube. So this was back in like 2005 or 4. And then once I became a teacher, I started making all these I would take a lot of pictures of my students and field trips, them, working, special projects, what have you. And then I would make these slideshows. And I really enjoyed that too. So, I mean, all those things go with creating content, right? And those were some of the most enjoyable times. I always enjoyed doing those sorts of things. I like teaching too. I mean, but I think probably if I had started sooner, I would be better at doing something that was strictly creative and not teaching, because it's not necessarily always creative. You have a curriculum and you have to get through it, and also dealing with parents and other teachers. I mean, teachers, no offense, but sometimes they just are, even when they're not gang stalkers and not mobbing me, they still can be annoying because every teacher thinks they know everything. But I've had some good colleagues. I mean, I've had some great ones, especially at Ruby Bridges. There were some great colleagues. I mean, really only at Ruby Bridges. The other ones I've had, I mean, some of them were decent, but nothing like Ruby Bridges. And one thing I will say is, like, really, whoever you are, whoever's listening, you have to know how good your life is. Because my life has been not good since 2016, since the covert surveillance went overt, and then it just became, who wants somebody following you around all the time? And then you tell someone and they think you're crazy. Like, that's just, it's horrible. It's a horrible sensation to go outside and not feel safe. But I remember when I didn't feel any of this, and I would like go on and on about like maybe stupid stuff like my love life or things about my coworkers, which was nothing. They were like fine. If I just had the sense to know, like, look, for one, your job is your job. You do it as best you can. You leave it there and you go to your home, and then you have your free time and you do your own stuff. And like, realizing that like the things that I used to get to do, like my yoga, and I used to go to the parkour and like other things I used to do that were just fun, and go hang out with my friend on the weekend, like those things, or see my kids and have Thanksgiving and Christmas, things that I used to do I took for granted. Don't ever, ever, ever take those things for granted. Because if I could like go back to like 2010, and when I was just going to move into my apartment at the end of the year, and even if the game, maybe just moving into the apartment triggered it, I don't know. And then it just got worse, and then they just used your whole life against you, kind of thing. But don't ever take your life for granted, because you think stupid things like your love life, or I don't know what I used to complain about, even not having all the money I wanted or whatever, or not having the apartment I wanted at the time. Silly things like that could be easily changed. Like, you don't, now I know what true hell is like, and what true torture is like. And yes, targeted individuals are tortured. But at least, I guess what I could say is that at least I did have a good life at some point, even though I didn't appreciate it the way I needed to. So I will say, appreciate your life. It's very, very important because you never know when you're going to be thrust in a cycle of bizarro world and be gaslit and followed and destroyed by people you don't know. Alrighty, so I want to know what you guys think and how was it seeing the sunrise and what did you notice in my area? It's beautiful, right? And what if you were in my circumstance, what would you do? If you're targeted, what's your targeting like? What do you think about interracial relationships? Do you think they're a no-go? Do you agree with me that it's black and white relationships in the United States are something very specific and that there usually is a power dynamic? And or do you feel like my friend, if you're like African American, my Twitter friend, and I'm not trying to laugh at him or anything, but I'm just saying he's pretty staunch in his beliefs that there are no interracial relationships that make sense and that you should not have relationships with your oppressor. And on some level, there's a part of me that just does believe that because of my own experiences. But I also know that people get to decide who they love, and I am not in charge of that. And I'm certainly not going to hate anyone or even put them down because of it. Because for one, I would be a hypocrite. Because that's precisely what I had done, even though my views on it have changed as I've gotten older. But what do other people think about it? All right.